Well, good morning, everybody. It's Friday again, March 18th, and this morning we're going to have a discussion with Tom Berry from Senator Leahy's office, and basically in regards to our on-farm slaughter response that we got from, I believe it was, we got that, Tom, from Senator Sanders' office, that response, the response to our questionnaire. I think maybe you had a copy of that.
Yeah, I do. That was provided to congressional staff ahead of a phone call we had with people at the USDA, just to kind of get some stuff in front of us as we had discussed this, and we had a subsequent phone call.
Yeah, and you met everybody in the room prior?
I believe so. I don't know. Happy to introduce.
We'll
Go ahead.
run around. Go ahead, Anthony or Chris.
Anthony Polina, Washington County.
Corey Parent, Franklin County and Albert.
Bobby Starr, Essex, Orleans County.
Chris Pearson, Chittenden.
Brian Collmore, Rutland.
And we also have Michael O'Grady with us from our council, Legislative Council, and Linda Lehman. And so we received that letter with no heading and no signature. And we found that there was some contradictory remarks made even in their own letter regarding what had been approved previously and is in the law. And, you know, it's pretty hard. It's very hard for us to accept a letter of any type of recommendations and things when we don't know who we got it from, don't know where it came from, and there was contradictory remarks made with their own answers. So I don't know. Michael O'Grady can explain out some of the things that were a little bit misleading in their response. And I don't, do you have that, Michael?
I do.
And could we ask you to just move there so Tom can see you? Because you
Move where?
just to that chair. You're totally blocked by Collmore, which is quite an optical illusion.
There we go.
Well put, Senator, well put.
One of the questions that they stated that was provided by this committee, which was not an accurate statement, was, can multiple owners of an animal slaughter that animal for personal use under the FMIA personal use exception? It starts out with saying that they have not expressly allowed multiple owners, but as it progresses through that paragraph in its answer, it starts to reference multiple owners owning the animal. So it's contradictory in its response. My only thought is that they were talking about multiple owners in general, or owners of the livestock in general. But when you go and look at other states and their personal slaughter exception, they do not exactly track the federal statute or rule. Federal statute or rule says an individual. But when you look at the 27 states that have their own programs, sometimes it's farmer, sometimes it's the premises, sometimes it's the owner, sometimes it's person, sometimes it's persons, sometimes it's owner or owners. And so there's obviously divergence in the state statutes that are approved for equal to status by FSIS. And I don't see why Vermont is being focused in on for whatever reason. I just literally this morning went through the 27 states and I pulled out about 14 where I can make an argument that they allow multiple owners. And I found one where I think they allow itinerant slaughterers, or at least a licensed mobile slaughterer to come do the slaughter under personal use. According to the FSIS response to the Vermont congressional delegation, that would not be allowed. So you have other states that allow something that FSIS is saying that Vermont is not allowed to do. And there, as the chair noted, there's no accountability. There's no actual notification to the committee that sent the letter or to the Agency of Agriculture, the state agency of agriculture, which is the one enforcing the state statutes and rules. And so it seems Vermont is being singled out unnecessarily, potentially unfairly. And FSIS is focusing on questions that the committee isn't asking. They continue to focus on whether or not an animal share arrangement is being looked at in Vermont. It's not. It hasn't been. The committee looked at it for about 2 weeks last year, required a report. The report said, recommended don't go forward with it. It hasn't been a discussion since, but FSIS continues to come back to that, even though we've told them repeatedly that that is no longer an issue. So I don't know what is going on. I don't have a good recommended resolution. For some reason, Vermont has been singled out.
Let me make a couple comments or suggestions related to context. As the chairman points out, this correspondence is not signed, it's not dated, it's not on letterhead. And I think it was offered to the delegation for something to have in front of us as we discussed a number of questions that the delegation had brought, again, informally to FSIS. Now, I think you do make a good point that, it's not as explicit a document as it might be. And in some cases, it may be self-contradictory. There's at least one important statement in here that actually isn't even a sentence. The editor in me tells me. So this, it was intended, I believe, by USDA for a conversation with the congressional delegation. The congressional delegation, Senator Leahy, has no formal role in this process of determining what Vermont's doing that may or may not be in compliance with the underlying rules and laws. And so in order to have a set of answers that Vermont can depend on legally, and clearly this is a multi-million-dollar question for Vermont as far as an industry that's impacted by it. I'm not an attorney here and I don't represent the state of Vermont. My take would be that what you probably want and what this is not is a formal signed dated document on USDA letterhead answering your questions. One thing I'm not clear on and probably should be is whether there is a pending request for such a group set of answers from USDA, because one role the delegation can and often does play is to prompt a federal agency to respond to a very specific request from a constituent, in this case, the state, where they may not have done so. And so I don't think, even though we can discuss and I certainly see some issues as well with this document, what the document tells us about USDA's position it is, by no means a formal statement to the state of Vermont of the USDA's position. And we can help you get that if there is a pending request to USDA for a set of answers. And I may have lost track of where the conversation stands. Is there a pending formal request from the state of Vermont to USDA for answers to these questions?
Yes, Chris, you want to answer
Well,
that? Well,
I don't
Michael
want to
can.
answer that. Mr.
So the committee sent a letter directly to the FSIS Inspection Division in Iowa. They responded, but they did not actually answer the questions that the committee posed. So the committee asked me to send an email asking for further clarification, which I have done, and which there was no response to, except for what the congressional delegation received.
Would you like a copy of that letter and the correspondence, Tom? Would
Yes,
that
I
be
may very well have it, but it would be good to have it back in front of me. And I think what might be useful is to make sure that USDA does not believe that by virtue of having had a conference call with us and provided this document that they have somehow responded to the request from the committee. And I can clarify that, back to them, thanks for having taken the time with the congressional delegation. We understand better where you're coming from, but we appreciate your prompt response to this written request from the state of Vermont or from the Vermont General Assembly.
Chris
So,
has a.
I guess I see it a little differently. I'm not sure I want to rattle them to get a formal response, because all signs seem to indicate we're going to get a response that is not good, not that's going to say the practice that you've been doing for, what was it, Michael, 10 years
At least.
is suddenly no longer acceptable. So rather than rush to that, Tom, I'm hoping we could talk to you and get your understanding of Senator Leahy's willingness to kind of push back on what seems like a direction, a change in direction. We have, as you say, many millions of dollars in the agricultural sector at stake. We have people whose entire business model is threatened by this, and we face either that as a sort of a shutdown problem, or maybe equally bad is people just trying to continue this practice below the radar. That's not a good solution. At the same time, we have all sorts of supply chain problems with meat and food, and we're in this committee and elsewhere working very hard to make it easier and stronger to have ability to have local food available widely in Vermont. So before we just press the bureaucracy to get a formal answer, I'd like to hope that the delegation and Senator Leahy in particular, given his role on the Ag Committee and seniority generally, might be able to try to help us kind of get clarity that the status quo is actually something we can maintain. So I'd be curious your thoughts on that sort of piece of it.
Yeah, sure. In our conversation a couple of weeks ago with this document in front of us with USDA, I very specifically asked them the question of what has changed. We seem to have a change in your approach to the state of Vermont and in the regulations as you are enforcing them in Vermont. And their very clear answer, not to say that we can't prompt them again on that, was that nothing has changed, that the rules are the rules, and they have been for quite some time. There's been no change in the rules, no change in the USDA enforcement profile or oversight in Vermont. And so, we were told fairly specifically that their rules and how they interpret them in Vermont has not changed. Now that may be contradicted by some documentation. I understand the state may have related, written documentation from USDA previously that fairly explicitly accepts some of the practices that seem now to not be acceptable. But the USDA's position at this time, at least, is that nothing's changed. What are we being asked? What are we, the USDA, being asked to do differently? Because this is basically how it's always been, and since the rules been in place.
Michael, would you like to respond?
I would
to
just, Tom basically responded with what I was gonna say. The agency, when Phil Durfler, the then deputy administrator, made his interpretations, asked for a letter from FSIS, from Durfler, recognizing that what Vermont was doing is allowable. And the agency has that as part of their record of the program and record of approval. So to say that nothing has changed, the agency just needs to show FSIS a document from their own deputy administrator from 2013 or 2014.
And has the agency done that? Do we know?
I think the agency is a little bit scared.
Yeah.
I think they are very anxious about the status of their Equal To program. It's not just about, for them, it's not just about providing the slaughter inspection services that the state relies on and having that capacity that Equal To provides. It's about jobs for them. If they lose Equal To, 10 people lose their jobs. So that's a very real anxiety for them when FSIS starts saying we're threatening your Equal To status.
But to add to that, Tom, they might lose 10 jobs over at the ag agency, but if that's followed through with their make up rules and regs that we got in that note, we could lose 10, at least 10, if not more, small beef producers that rely on raising 8 or 10 beef a year along with their veggies and all that. So there's a lot more to it than just losing those 10 jobs. But I don't know if you could get a copy of that letter that came to the agency back in 13, Michael?
It's 13 or 14.
In 2013 or 14, approving what we were doing or was proposing to do, and we haven't had one problem with this until recently. We had multiple owners, and one thing we did, I believe, put in our law that a farmer can't help these partial owners to slaughter that animal at all. And a lot of the 4 owners of that animal that have bought the four quarters of the animal, maybe they've never slaughtered an animal in their life. So some of them came and asked, well, can we have an itinerant slaughterer come to the farm and slaughter the animal so it will be done in a humane way and it'll be better for the animal, for us, and what's the difference if we hire an itinerant slaughterer? So we have allowed that to happen, but it was not to try to skirt any law. It was to improve, animal care and proper husbandry, and proper slaughter. But, other, I don't think.
Yeah, and,
they-
on that issue, and that's also something we discussed with USDA, and I think is reflected to some extent in the document that we have in front of us. I think USDA seemed flexible, if you will, to, the farmer is slaughtering the animal, but there is some assistance there in doing so. But I think they were fairly clear that where itinerant slaughter is by a professional is involved, that their interpretation and administration of the rules would be that itinerant slaughter falls within the custom use exemption, and that anybody who is practicing that trade should be doing so in compliance with the custom use exemption, which then takes the personal use exemption becomes moot to some extent, would be at least my amateur interpretation of the regulation, that if you've got that itinerant slaughter participating, that person's custom use exemption basically gets you into the position you need to be in with USDA under the rule. If on the other hand, you have somebody practicing professional itinerant slaughter who is not compliant with the custom use exemption, that would be, in the eyes of the USDA, problem.
Michael, do you recall what state uses or does use itinerant slaughters?
Ohio, in their personal use slaughter exception, I'll just read it to you. Says, I'm gonna have to page through this stuff, sorry. I'll just paraphrase it. It basically says it's the person who owns it, or a person who slaughters the animal for the person who owns it for their personal use. And I thought that was really curious, so I dove a little deeper. Here it says this is their personal slaughter exception. The person who slaughters or prepares animals on his farm, or has animals slaughtered or prepared for his personal or family use, and sells no meat products of such animals. Now, that's pretty curious. So I dove into the Ohio administrative rules, and they too, it's really interesting. They incorporate the Federal Meat Inspection Act rules by reference, but then they replace the personal use exception in their state rules and provide, first of all, that it's not an individual, that it's, find it. By the owner, the slaughtering by the owner, not the individual. And you should know that almost every state statute and every state code says the singular is the plural. So when you read owner, it means owners. So the slaughter by the owner of livestock for their own raising on their own premises, note that it's using the plural there, or the slaughter by an individual operating a mobile facility to prepare products for the owner of the livestock on the owner's premises. So that basically says there can be multiple owners, and those multiple owners can hire somebody that has a mobile facility to prepare products for the owner for their own use. That to me is itinerant slaughter.
So maybe we need to rewrite our language a little bit and take the word itinerant out. But it's
Yeah,
really
and with without putting specific, having put specific language in front of the USDA in our discussion, my clear takeaway from an informal discussion was that, sure, bring on the itinerant slaughterers and their mobile facilities, as long as that person is compliant with the custom use exemption.
Right, but you can't really make a mobile facility fully comply with the custom use exemption. Because the custom use exemption needs a sewer and a drain.
Mhm.
So
It wouldn't fall.
I don't know how, unless there's some sort of mobile catch basin
Mhm.
that is approved by USDA for a mobile facility. I don't know how you make that mobile facility custom compliant.
Do
Yeah.
you remember, Tom, back 10 years ago, maybe, we had put a lot of money into a mobile chicken slaughtering facility, vehicle, a big long trailer with heaters and, hot water heaters to bring the temperature up to us. Hell, that didn't last 2 years. I mean, and it went bust, and I think we spent $60,000 to $100,000 on that and sold it for 10 and felt lucky we got 10 for it. And it was like brand new, and I think if you tried to do a portable mobile beef unit, it would be $250,000, and it wouldn't be functional because of the waste and all that. So to meet the standards of a custom slaughter facility. So we really need a little push from the top guys here to help us get this straightened out. It isn't that we don't want to regulate these guys. We want them to register. We want to know who the owners are. I mean, we put safeguards in, and in the years that this has been allowed, we haven't had one incident of complaints. And what drove this is people up in Burlington were going up to Milton up that way and buying sheep and goats, and they couldn't be done on the farm. So they'd take them home and do it in the backyard. And one guy was even using a tree in the front yard to hoist the animal up to slaughter it. And I mean, all the neighbors were, upset, and rightfully so. So that's when we really got into this on-farm slaughter deal, to get that done at the farm, and let them take their beef, lamb, or pork and goat and take it to the cutter. No, we've never looked at this, on the light side. We've been very cautious about putting it together, and we really need some clarification. And we got the letter of, way back in 13 where they rubber stamped it or approved it. And so I don't know, maybe
As far as ongoing communications, for ongoing communications or future communications from the senator's office to USDA on this, we've had thus far 2 conversations. One was with highest level officials within USDA, and Frank, they were the ones who were on the call. Frankly, they didn't have the expertise that some of the more middle level people in FSIS needed to have to answer our questions, but we did bring it to the concerns with what's going on in their posture towards Vermont to the highest levels at USDA. And then we had the follow-up call, which resulted in this document. that that addressed the more, in more detail, how they interpret the rule. In both those calls, we certainly expressed that Vermont has a set of practices and expectations here, and it seems that USDA has taken a stronger posture towards Vermont, and we were asking the question of why. We can certainly communicate informally with USDA going forward that, hey, back off on Vermont. This is an important industry. There's no problems here. We've got a state statute that seems to be getting things done. And we can communicate that message to USDA. As far as seeing any visible change in USDA's posture or interpretation, I would look for any formal communication asking for a signed written document of what their interpretations and policies are. That would really need to come from the state to USDA, and then we could support that. So we have and can continue to nudge, cajole, ask the questions, push USDA to not take a different or more or stronger oversight approach to Vermont. But pending any very specific request from either this committee or the legislature or the Vermont Agency of Ag and Markets, we don't have and won't have any direct request to USDA to respond formally to anything. I think that's where things stand at this point. Open to further, suggestions or requests.
Chris?
I guess my question is for you and Michael. My sense is if we really believe the feds are comfortable with status quo, that some way of communicating that from the feds to the Agency of Ag is going to be important, because this whole discussion here got started because the agency was picking up something, and it's never been clear where that was coming from. And they were in turn starting to change practices, frankly, in a way that's not compliant with statute. So I don't think we're at a point where we can just ignore this and resume where we've been. And I'm going to guess that a written document that says nothing, no, you don't need to change anything is probably unlikely, but Michael, would you agree, some communication from USDA to the agency that,
And dogs.
well, and to us, but even if it was a verbal, maybe that would be enough to,
Writing. Want it in writing.
well, anyway, I mean, my sense is the agency is at this point assuming that there has been a change.
I think that FSIS has stated to the congressional delegation that there has been no change in their interpretation. And I don't think they're going to change that formally. But I do think they could informally back off in the review of the equal to status of the Agency of Agriculture and allow for the Agency of Agriculture to maintain status quo with potentially a greater diligence over some form of some of the activities. But I think that there's this threat of litigation now. And I don't think FSIS is going to change their position in any constructive way right now, formally and publicly. I think you're better off trying to get them to informally back off a little. It saves face for them because they've already effectively stated what their formal position is. And so I think an informal resolution is probably best.
Well, if we could get a letter from who the hell ever, as long as they'll sign the thing and put a letterhead on the paper and a date stating that no rules or regs have been changed and you're, can proceed with your operation as it has been unless you've changed your rules and regs, and we haven't changed ours. Have we?
We haven't changed the
No,
rules.
we haven't changed anything.
The last change on this was maybe 6 years ago, you were explicit that it was owner or owners of the animal.
Yeah,
But that was already the statutory construction interpretation of the word owner.
so do you need something from us, Tom, to help you, or?
Well, we've had this communication going with USDA. What if there's anything that, I guess, kind of reversing the question, other than kind of doing an informal push on USDA to lighten up here, if in fact that's what needs to happen, is there anything further that would be helpful for us to provide that people could hang a hat on? I think I just heard you, Mr. Chairman, say that having something in writing that there has been no change would be helpful. That's something that perhaps we could get generically without specific reference to Vermont, because certainly they stated it on our phone call that they're just doing what they've always done. The rules and regulations have been in place for a long time. Beyond that, if there's anything further that you want us to specifically do, other than generally
Well,
communicate with USDA and push back, it'd be, good
No,
to know.
the main thing that we'd like to have, maybe you do, or the senator, is to get some kind of an assurance out of them that they haven't changed their rules and they're following the guidelines that have been in place for X years. And we know we haven't changed our laws.
Mhm.
So, I mean, the agency's the one that's all nerved up over losing their, well, no, I shouldn't say. The agency is all nerved up over losing their status, and the farmers are all nerved up because they can't proceed with their young stock this spring that they're gonna get ready to butcher this fall if they can't do on-farm slaughter. And so as long as you can get something from somebody up high enough that states they haven't changed their rules and it's status quo of where it's been, then everybody's been blowing smoke. The little guys have been blowing smoke to each other.
But if that letter says that nothing's changed, including the standards for approval for equal to status, then I don't see how they can say that Vermont's out of compliance,
Yeah.
because nothing has changed.
No.
Well, that's where the conversation's been kind of strange, because they have said nothing has changed in their rules or in the statute, and that's a matter of public record. Nothing has changed as far, there has not been a new rule adopted, and there has not been new legislation adopted. So, that's something that can be confirmed in a fairly straightforward fashion. That as far as the rule and regulations, there has been no change.
Well, it's a little strange though. You get a letter with, like we got, with no heading, no date, and no signature, and they contradict their own statutes within the letter. Who the hell we got it from? And if you got one from an undersecretary or somebody at the top, at least it's gonna be on a letterhead and signed by somebody with some authority.
Yeah, well, if the request is to have this letter signed by an official with a date and letterhead on the top from USDA, we can make that request, but I think I heard some reluctance to do that at this point.
Well, I think Chris raised that issue and, you know, whatever you think will do the job, get the job done so we can get
What-
back in business.
Yeah, well, and on that point, a request for a formal interpretation signed and dated. Before I would recommend to Senator Leahy that we request that, I think it would have to come from USDA, not USDA, but Vermont Ag and Markets as essentially the regulated entity here. You know, they've got a contractual arrangement with USDA that is important to the Vermont industry. And so a request for a document like this signed and dated, really, we would support something, a formal request from the state of Vermont to produce that. But for the senator to request that directly to USDA would be really intervening in that contractual and very important business arrangement that exists between the state of Vermont and USDA. So if a request is made by the state for a formal interpretation that can be depended on legally, we would support that request, but the senator's office won't make that request.
So if you do it informally though, so it's informal, you guys can go ahead and work through that maybe, but how much faith can we put in that? That would keep them off our backs and stop sending letters like we ended up getting.
Yeah, I mean, we can continue communicating informally with USDA on this. Again, a request for formal, response that you can dependably hang your hat on, and if necessary, take into an administrative hearing or whatever, again, that has to come directly from the state to USDA.
Chris?
Tom, just point out a couple of things. As I understand it, the communication that has the agency nervous was informal. And so perhaps that's an opportunity for you all to have sort of a commensurate informal communication that relaxes the agency, that they're equal to is under threat. And I don't know if that feels appropriate, but I'm trying to listen closely, and it seems like there's a willingness from you and from Senator Leahy to engage quite a lot informally. And I think, frankly, even the letter that we got back is obviously informal, as we've said many times. So that might be enough. And I guess I'm wondering if that allows you the maximum bandwidth and flexibility to kind of make our case, without us being too formal. And part of, I think, the motivation where I sit is that rules and statutes may not change, but the people interpreting them may well change. And the fear I have is that a fresh bureaucratic face is engaged here and looking at something that's been pretty solidly practiced in Vermont for a decade now, and sort of without changing the rules, without changing the statute, come to a different conclusion. And that's what I fear. And so part of our discussion has been sort of having them say nothing's changed in the rules or statutes. That doesn't mean that nothing has changed in whether or not they consider us to be in compliance. So I don't know. anyway, I think we made the case, and I guess I just hope over and over that you'll be able to fight hard for our folks and for us, barring something formal, because that has its own risks, I guess.
Yeah, message received. As I said, we've had a couple calls, one right up to the deputy secretary level. Another more with the people over there in the trenches. And so they know we're watching this and we have some concerns, and we can keep those lines of communication open. And with USDA, while again, leaving the agency firmly in the lead on any formal back and forth.
Any other questions from committee members? Michael, do you have any other questions? No. Do you have any questions for us, Tom? Anything else?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I have been, I have talked with Steve Collier at Vermont Ag and Markets, and will continue to do so, and take some guidance from Vermont Ag and Markets as well on how we can be most helpful.
Yeah. Well, as you move forward with this, if you need anything out of us, let us know, and we appreciate your time this morning, and it was a quick notice, and
Yeah.
really appreciate you being willing to give up an hour or so of your time for us. So
Good, and I
thanks
do
a
have
lot.
one to-do list, and I can get this back to you, Bobby, if it's okay, which would be to confirm that at least on paper, as far as the regulation goes, there may have been a change in profile, but there has been no actual change in the regulation or the rule. And I can work on getting that back to you. So, that's something I think we can get in black and white, that everybody can at least be on that page. So I'll do that. And meanwhile, keep folks apprised of any ongoing communications on this.
And Tom, in your conversations about whether anything has changed, could you also ask about any change to guidance? Because they do have a guidance document that is specifically about the exemptions.
Uh-huh.
And it does include notes that say multiple owners are allowed under the personal use exemption.
Yep.
So if nothing has changed, I would like to know if that guidance interpretation has changed.
Okay, I'll see what I can do there.
Well, thank you very much, Tom,
Thank you.
again, and say hello to your crew.
Will do. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Enjoy mud season.
Yeah, it's here. Didn't think it was ever gonna come. Well.
I think that could be fruitful, right? I mean,
Yeah, I think both would be good. The formal request from the agency and then the sort of informal, hey.
well, geez, I worry about a lot of formal stuff.
I think the agency's worried about a formal request as
Well,
well.
then they don't have to.
They wouldn't want to write one.
I think they feel that FSIS is a little backed into a corner right now. And has to maintain an interpretation that is strictly compliant with the statute. And if they get pressed on it, for example, through litigation, that's what they're going to assert is the
Yeah,
law.
but if the rules and the regs haven't been changed.
Right. That's why I was asking about the guidance. The guidance document says multiple owners, says owners don't need to live where the livestock are, it's owners. It's when you go and look at extension service guidance around the country, it says FSIS guidance allows multiple owners. It says that. And
Yeah,
you
but
go to a state like California and it says owner or owners under the personal slaughter.
well, it would be an awful blow to our small ag producers that we've spent years trying to diversify and to do other things besides milk the cow. And then,
Just when we need them most too.
yeah, right, in this pandemic, and the big guys aren't even keeping the store shelves full. And then they come along and shut us down. And I
We
mean,
have too much government.
I think they've got
Candy's free.
their hands full taking care of the contaminated chicken and things that they should be watching, and they're up here bothering us little hillbillies with no problems at all. And, you know, they better start spending their time where they need to spend it.
One of the things that I saw that gave me a kernel of thought is that New York, their personal slaughter exception is for a bona fide farmer.
A bona fide.
A bona fide farmer.
We can change the definition of farmer.
We could have 630,000 bona fide farmers.
Or you allow multiple ownership by bona fide farmers. But you then allow personal on farm by the individual, right? So the bona fide farmers can own the herd as multiple owners because they're bona fide farmers. But the individual can come to the farm and do on-farm slaughter under the person.
Could you get us that definition of a
That's the
bona
thing, we
fide?
couldn't find one bona fide farmer.
Yeah,
I found a federal definition from about 25 years ago that said that they had been in business for 2 years
oh, and then you're bona fide?
to be bona fide.
Yeah, we have a few years.
That is good.
So that just gave me like a.
I'm just gonna keep an old cow to sell like one share in to allow someone to become a bona fide farmer and like sell like 1 million shares of a cow at like $35 a share. I mean, you could theoretically do that, right?
You could theoretically do that.
So you just need to keep one and they got on it for 2 years. And
So,
Then you're exempt from Act 250.
yeah.
but other states get at that approach by saying that they have to be raising the animal, and then they define what raising the animal means. And it's not just owning an ownership share, like Senator Parent proposed. It's more than that. And so there's the thing that when you look at all the different states, there are some states that are just like the federal law verbatim. But there's about 13 or
And
14
Are they
states.
doing on-farm slaughter?
No, they're not.
Oh,
But then there's 13 or 14 states where it's different, and they do allow on-farm slaughter. It's very clear in some of them. You can go onto the farm and buy, as long as the farmer that sold it to you doesn't insist. It's basically what Vermont did. It gets incorporated into a couple other state statutes. So it's there.
oh, you mean the history of allowing it?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And we did get correspondence way back, you said
Right.
in 13.
And I still think you can do personal slaughter. I still think you can do on-farm slaughter, but it's just the one person that has to do it.
But you said person in all those statutes is persons.
I literally went through in any state, any one of the equal to states that didn't say individual. I went into their statutory construction provision, and every single one of those states says the singular means the plural.
So